from central Wisconsin. It's 31 degrees here, and it is, before, when I woke up, it was just snowing like a banshee. It was just really coming down, but it's gotten a lot lighter now, so we got it didn't snow that much, about an inch or so. So that's tolerable. It's when it gets into the 6-inch and 12-inch that it's hard to go anywhere, and hard to be in parking lots with it coming down on your cars and all of that good stuff. And I don't like to drive in it at all because I kind of get in car accidents, so we kind of leave that be if it's really bad. So I want to start out today by saying hi to everybody and welcoming everybody for coming on. And I'm going to start out with, the other day I had a chiropractic appointment. And as I'm laying on the table, Rebisar shows up. Not only does he show up, but he brings a very demure reptilian lady with him. She's different than the other ones I've seen. She came in with him and she had 2 red hearts on her shoulder. So I figured, she must be pretty good there. But anyway, he sat her down over in the corner, and she had a face more like a gecko, very finely featured. She was a lighter, almost a pale, icy green color. And she had this little white purse that she carried. It had a hard handle, and she sat it down on her lap. And she actually stayed there for the whole appointment. And Rebisar was intently watching what the chiropractor was doing to me. So it kind of made me wonder what he was, what's going on here. But anyway, all seemed to be good, and I felt pretty good when I was done. And then later at night, the same day, I decided, I did my new UU session. And the first scene that I get, I am immediately in a fresh green grassed clearing. It was very bright and very light, and it felt really good. And I became aware of 2 fawns, pretty little things. And there was a large, quiet forest in the background and on the side. Anyway, I was really surprised to see the 2 fawns because they were walking right in front of me. One just continued on walking, and then the other one stopped. And he or she, I don't know what it was, turned to just look at me. At this point, there was no communication. There was no telepathic communication or talking at all. It just was, like the all is. It was just there. And everything was in its place. And at that particular time, I came out of the New Youth session, and in comes a group, 3 reptilians. Sometimes they like to hear the new UU. Anyway, the one that you're all familiar with is the lady who wears the lipstick and the beads, and she likes to trail along if I'm shopping or something. She evidently likes the way we do some things here. So she's learning. And the other one that comes in is the little lady that Rebisar brought in during my chiropractic appointment. And again, she's very quiet, she's very demure, and she sits down and the other lady sits down. Then this big male reptilian comes into the scene. And he is tall, he's a darker green, he has a big head, and he seems really full, like strong. And he jauntily walks in on the scene. He's wearing a Sedona red, if you've ever seen the cliffs and the whatever you want to call them in Sedona, it's a certain red. And that's the color of his jacket. And it's kind of a thick cotton is the closest I could come to the material, although I don't know that that's what it was. But he had the one button, and I've seen this one button jacket closure before. That's what they kind of seem to go with is a one button. Anyway, he comes in and he's walking around, and I said, well, why don't you sit down next to the lady with the pearls? And he says, this is all telepathic, by the way. He says, I'm not sitting next to her. I don't want to sit next to her. I said, well, fine, go sit somewhere else. And so he did, and he kind of sat at the opposite side of the room with his back towards her, which I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, then they listen to the new you, and I do it out loud. And so that part of them settling down had ended, and my new you, going back into the new you, the forest scene changed. Remember, I was in the forest with the two fawns, or in the clearing. Well, after that, Luciano Pavarotti made an appearance or started walking towards me. He had an emerald green candle in his hand, and it was lit. By the way, he looks exactly the same. If you'd see him on stage with his tux and his white shirt and his white bow tie, and he had his hanky in his left hand that was unfolded that he uses to mop his forehead with. And he came, and he was going to do a performance in this huge, expansive banquet hall. Now, on the back of the banquet hall were round tables with white linen tablecloths that were draped down to the floor. They had crystal glasses set on them, and most of the seats were filled up already. They wanted to hear Luciano sing too, so that's where they were sitting. I got a table that was a little bit closer. There was a beautiful grand piano sitting at the front of the room, and it was quite a nice room. And so we were all waiting for him to start singing. And he bowed a little bit, and he smiled. And then I glanced off to the left of the room, and I saw this brilliant turquoise white light. And it really pulled me in. So I got up from the table, and I walked over into this turquoise white light. And on the right-hand side of the scene of the light was almost the outline of what appeared to be a large water bird. It was like a great blue heron. I don't know if that's what it was, but that's what it resembled. And there was nothing else that was really perceptible in this light other than the birds. And the atmosphere seemed alive, but at the same time, it was very peaceful. And it was all, really beautiful. Then somehow I was back in the scene with Luciano again. Only this time, both he and I were in a theater where an opera was going to be performed with Pavarotti as one of the leads. Again, he was holding his white handkerchief, and he led me to a front row seat in the theater and had me sit down. At this point, he was very polite. He was very gracious. The theater itself was done in Renaissance decor. The theater seats were upholstered in this luxurious dark red and gold velvet. After I sat down, Luciano walked up to the stage, and the orchestra started playing, and the music and the opera began. And that's when I came out of the experience, and that's when the reptilians left the room. because I guess they knew that the new you had ended. But anyway, by the way, this morning when I was doing the new you, the male reptilian showed up. He's quite an interesting character. Oh, by the way, when he looked at me, when I first saw him, he had amber yellow eyes, and his head came down because he's big, he's tall, and he looked at me, and it was like his eyes just bored right through me. I don't know if I could say I was scared. I could have been, because he was intense, but I'm sure. Well, everything turned out okay, and when the new you starts, he calms down a lot. He is very peaceful and calm. So it was just an interesting experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, I've been talking a little bit about animals, but I'm going to talk some more about them. Dwayne, the great writer, and Ava have done, Dwayne has done the groups on animals and children and cats and children. I think somebody loves cats. Anyway, you can find them on YouTube if you go to wonderfulworldwideeducators.com and look up the different blogs that they have, or the different YouTubes that they have, I should say. I did, and they're great little stories. They're fun reading, and animals do know what you're thinking and what you're talking about. They're not stupid. They probably know more than we do at times. And one of the people I used to watch on TV, her name was Sonia Fitzpatrick, and she was born profoundly deaf in Britain during World War II. And she said she grew up in fear and silence. She had her own TV show called The Pet Psychic. Anyway, she said when she grew up in this fear and silence, she had turned to animals for comfort and eventually communication. So because she was profoundly deaf, she began talking to her dogs, cats, geese, and they talked back telepathically. And she said at first she assumed that all children could communicate with animals, and for the most part, I think they can, unless the parents have gotten in there and curtailed that some way. And she had something happen on Christmas Day, and evidently the geese that she had been talking to, or the goose, the family decided to butcher for Christmas dinner. And she said right then and there she became a vegetarian. She didn't want to eat any of her friends. And she also stopped talking to animals for many, many years after this occurred. But she said in 1994, St. Francis of Assisi came and spoke to her about her gift of speaking to animals. She took it up again. She began speaking to the animals, and she lives now in Houston, Texas, but she talks to them, and they talk to her about their emotional, their physical, and actually spiritual concerns, and about what's bothering them in the body. Evidently, she's very, very accurate. We can do the same thing because they do talk to us. They absolutely do. I tell a little story here. This happened a few years ago. I was driving down the road coming from my son's house going home. Now there's a pretty big pickup truck in front of me, and we're on a country road, and a deer comes out from the left-hand side of the road and runs in front of the truck. Well, of course, the truck hits this deer. I heard the thud, the bam, and I've never seen anything like this before. This deer was thrown up over 20 feet over the pines. I mean, it was humongous. And of course, the deer again came down with a thud. The smell was pretty bad because all the insides were coming out. And I had actually pulled my car over to the side of the road. I was lucky enough to stop And the truck that had hit the deer had done a U-turn and parked on the opposite side of the road. I don't know why he did that, but he did. And I went up to his truck and I banged on the window. Are you okay? Hello in there. And there was no reaction from him whatsoever. I don't know what happened. He didn't see me, or he didn't acknowledge me at all anyway. He could have been in shock. I banged again. I talked to him. Still nothing. Well, anyway, I walked back. As I'm walking back to my car, I kept looking back. Am I crossing the road? And looking back at him to see if there's any reaction. Well, in the meantime, in that quick moment, well, anyway, another truck had pulled up in the meantime, and a man had gotten out, and the guy acknowledged him. He rolled down his window, and they started talking. So I didn't have to call 911 or anything or get the man help. It seemed like the other driver took over, so I was wondering about this. I'm driving carefully, very carefully, back home. And I vowed right then and there that I was going to talk to these deer and tell them I was coming through and to stay off the roads. This is all telepathically, we don't send out a radio broadcast, although it might be a good idea. But I had asked at that time, of course, I was in the corporation, and there is what they call an animal master by the name of Pavarotti. So I'm saying, hey, Pavarotti, why don't you tell these deer I'm coming through? Warn them for me. I don't want to hit any of them. So they're so beautiful. So he says to me, well, you can do the same thing. You can tell them. And so I began telepathically telling the deer that I was coming through and to stay off the road. In fact, stay back in the trees so that I don't have to see you, be careful. And I also warn some of the other animals that come out of the forest and cross the road, like raccoons and possums and assortment of animals that we have here up north. And my husband loves deer. I mean, he absolutely adores them, and he always wants to look at them. But tell him that.
Well, after meeting Sandy and riding around, we take trips around and we go up north and everything. And I used to love to watch the deer, like in the evening, standing in the open fields along the side of the road and everything. And one day it dawned on me, like I haven't seen a deer in like 3 years. and I was mentioning that to Sandy. Well, what happened to all the deer? Where are they? They gone away. And then the truth comes out. Sandy told them to go in hiding somewhere, and that's why they disappeared. And then I told Sandy, but I still love to see them out there. And so Sandy relented and just said, well, you can stay in the field by the road, just don't cross the road while we're driving through. And all of a sudden, all the deer showed up again, like they were back again.
So they hear us. They absolutely hear us, and they know what we're saying. And it's about an alligator. And when I was living in the Everglades, and I was with a gal who was also in the corporation at the time. And when we go out and about driving, we decided to stop and walk out on this deck. It's a dock, not a deck. There's a little deck first, and then the dock goes out from there. It's where they load the tourists for the Everglades boats tours. And we happened to see a gator pop his head up out of the water. So we start talking to him. And he looks like he's listening. And he swims a little bit towards us. Okay. We go back on our way. And so we decide to do it again the next day. So out we go out on the dock. We can't see him, but we called to him. Pretty soon, up pops his head. Over he starts coming over. Okay, we figured that was far enough for him to come over, so we retreated back on the dock. You know, we have to have a quick getaway in instances like that, because if he swam really fast, which they can do, but they can also run really fast on the land. So our retreat was back on the dock into the car and bye-bye, you know. And so a couple days later, we went out there again. Now, each time he kept coming closer and closer and closer. We called him again on the third time, and sure as shooting, up pops the head, and he starts a-swimming. Well, when he got to be about, I'd say, 20 feet from the dock, we decided to call it quits. And that kind of put the end to our little gator excursion out there in the Everglades, because the next time, you know, he might run up on land and come after us or something. They're all over in the Everglades anyway. You can't drive down the road without seeing one, that's for sure, or many at a time. So I had another experience doing a New You session, and this time, after I started doing the New You, I was in a jungle forest, and there were lemurs, the ring-tailed lemurs, hanging on the trees, etc. Now, in the middle of the clearing, there was a clearing there. There was a whirling whirlpool of light blue water. It just glistened and sparkled, but it was almost like a hurricane was forming. But I was fascinated as much as I was amazed and almost enthralled. It was really pretty. And then that session ended, and I heard something on the TV. It was actually this morning. There was a movie on called Bird of Paradise, and it took place on the Hawaiian Islands. And of course, that's the big surfing place. And I think this movie was done like in 1951. Anyway, I didn't recognize any of the main actors, but since I lived there and I like to watch the surfers, I thought it might be good. And they showed a picture of all these Hawaiian men surfing on these, they weren't modern surfboards, they were more, you know, the wooden, older type of surfboard. And they were coming in, and this one man just wiped out like incredibly. His board went off, and he was doing somersaults in the big wave that came in, and he finally washed up to shore, and they had to help him get up. And what they said to him was really interesting. They said, "You don't know the Manu. You don't know how to communicate and talk to the water." They said, "If you know Manu, you will know what the water is going to do. It will tell you." And I thought, well, now that is a thing I hadn't thought about. Talking and communicating with the water, knowing, you know, what it was going to do next, or probably tells you what animals are around, if they're dolphins or sharks or manta rays or whatever is there. And so I thought that was super, super interesting. And since Dwayne is a surfer,
Well, you know, that probably ties into what
he probably talks to it. What?
that ties in with what the Japanese do. When they did the crystal formations, they said if somebody said to the water, "You're absolutely beautiful," and they crystallize it, it was a beautiful crystal. If they talked to the water and said how terrible it was an ugly crystal. So the water can react, you know, to what you say to it. So,
but evidently also it'll tell you. Now, he needed to go to a sacred pool and and learn all of how the Manu worked. But
Well, so what's interesting is maybe we don't have to do all these water specialties. We can just ask the water to form itself into the most healing form that it possibly can for our health.
wouldn't hurt.
So maybe you're onto something there, dear.
Well, I don't know. Ancient Hawaiian things.